So today I would like to welcome Kathrin Bussmann, who is going to talk to us about how to build your brand in new markets. Now, Kathrin is an international marketing strategist who helps digital-first companies build successful global brands. She loves to operate at the intersection of global business, content marketing, and localization. And through her consultancy, Verbaccino Inc., Kathrin advises global-minded B2B brands on how to attract, engage, and retain more international customers. In her role as head of content localization at Bubble, she works with growth-oriented brands who are ready to expand into international markets. And as the producer and host of the Worldly Marketer podcast, she interviews industry experts on what it takes to go global in today's digital, social, multilingual marketplace. And if you haven't heard it before now, you should go and check out the Global Worldly Marketer podcast because it's certainly worth listening to. Kathrin, thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Kathrin. I'm very honored to be part of this, and thank you for inviting me to talk to you today.
It's our pleasure. So maybe just to give us a little bit of a start, maybe you can give us a little bit of background as to how you came to be an international marketing specialist. What was it that inspired you to enter into this fascinating field?
Well, you know, if you told me, I'd say even 10 years ago, that I would end up doing marketing as my core focus, I would have laughed because that is not my formal background. I went to university to study communication studies, which at the time, this was in the early 90s, meant theory of mass media, and the internet was not a thing yet. Nobody had email. There was no social media. There was no content marketing online or anything like that. So I was doing communication studies, and then I discovered linguistics, which is the scientific study of language. And then I went down that rabbit hole for quite a while as a graduate student. I don't think I understood what marketing was. I had this idea. I think a lot of people do this. They kind of confuse marketing and advertising, because advertising is what you see every day around you. And sometimes, we love it, and sometimes we find it annoying. But marketing is a very different, it's different. And it's not, it complements advertising campaigns, but it is a prerequisite for them, and it is quite different, and it's its own thing. And the reason I got interested in international marketing or multilingual marketing is, again, my background. I grew up here in Canada. I grew up trilingual. My first language is German. I was born and raised in the province of Quebec, so I grew up in a French environment. And English is kind of my third language, but I sort of learned all three languages at the same time, more or less, when I was little. So I'm very used to a multicultural, multilingual environment. To me, that's sort of the most natural thing in the world. And I've always been just fascinated with the differences between cultures and between worldviews as you sort of code switch between languages. I mean, you would know this too, right? Having grown up in the UK and now having lived in Austria for 20 years or more. And so you know what I'm talking about. When you sort of switch between languages and cultures, there's a whole kind of worldview that can come with that, and the ability to switch between worlds like that, I think is a very, very important skill today in our sort of very connected global economy that we have. So when I was looking for a business model for myself to be my own boss, basically, and start doing less academic things, more helpful things for more people, my obvious idea was to somehow make good use of my language skills and my communication skills. And I started Verbaccino as a consultancy for multilingual communication services. That's kind of a vague descriptor, but at the time I don't think I was quite clear on what services I was trying to offer and to whom exactly. So one of the things I had to do for my own business was just educate myself on what marketing is, because you can launch your own business, but if nobody knows about it, you're not going to get a lot of clients, right? So marketing is important if you're a business owner. That's kind of the first thing you figure out in a hurry if you didn't already know that. And so I started educating myself around marketing in general and content marketing in particular. And I kind of figured out that it's actually super interesting and fascinating. And now I think of it more as a way to connect different parties whose interests are aligned somehow. It doesn't even have to be in a private sector context. It can be in the nonprofit sector. It can be in any kind of walk of life where you need to raise awareness for your organization, your campaign, your services, your product, your ideas, your, you know, anything that you're trying to communicate to a target audience is going to require marketing. And of course, in this day and age, that happens over digital channels more than anything. Especially now that we're in a COVID situation, I think if you didn't already have some sort of digital marketing strategy before, you really need one now, because we're not able to do a lot of the in-person marketing activities that we may be used to before. And so I think that's where my interest in international comes from, is this this natural affinity to different cultures, different languages. I'm also a dual citizen. You know, my background is German, so I still have, basically all my relatives are still in Germany, and I grew up visiting them, you know, almost every summer. And so I still have a very strong connection to my German family. I spent a lot of time in Europe. I went to Berlin for my PhD. I've done a lot of traveling, not as much as you. I haven't seen as much of Asia, for instance, as you have. That's sort of still on my bucket list. But the point being, I feel most at home in a very global-minded context where people are interested in working across borders, across cultures, across languages. And the way I do that is through content marketing. So marketing that involves creating content for your target market, your target audience specifically, that is going to either educate or entertain or inspire or somehow connect with that target audience and get them interested in learning more about you. And so that way you can become valuable to them, and you become the first person or the first brand that they think of when they finally do need the product or service that you have to offer.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And from my side, I can truly say I'm really envious of your multicultural background and growing up with such good knowledge of all those languages that I spend a lot of hours sweating to get to a decent standard, let's say. But talking about marketing, and you already mentioned a lot of factors that are important about it, but why do companies need to have specifically international marketing? Maybe you can explain a little bit what's the main difference, or some of the main differences between a domestic marketing strategy and an international marketing strategy, because I'm not sure that it's clear for everybody why there should be any difference.
Well, I mean, if you are in the business of offering a product or service that can be of interest to people outside your own domestic borders, then it's never been easier than it is right now at this point in history to connect with customers or potential customers beyond your own borders. We have all these digital channels now that allow you to easily market yourself beyond your own borders. And it's just a matter of strategy and then execution. So, but the thing to realize is that what has worked well for you in your home market is probably not going to work that well in other markets. It might work a little bit, but it won't be as effective. And the reason is very simple. I mean, your domestic market, your home market, is a market you know well. And if you have been outsourcing any of your marketing activities to an agency, or if you have in-house marketing people in your company, you know that you know who you're dealing with. You know your home market. You know the customers here. Maybe you've met them personally. You think like them. You understand them. You speak the same language as them. When you start crossing borders into other markets, virtually or literally, you don't know what you don't know. And the problem is that a lot of companies make assumptions about how customers or potential customers in other
Mm-hmm.
markets think, and what they need, and what their values are, and what their priorities are. You know, at a basic level, I think most businesses understand that if they're expanding into a new market where the language, the local language, is different from their own language back in the home market, then I think everyone understands that it makes sense to translate, you know, your marketing messages, your technical documentation. There's some legal documents you're going to need to translate. There's things that are going to need to be translated into other languages. But that's just the beginning, right? That's just the surface, the tip of the iceberg that you can see and easily understand. There's a whole part of the iceberg under the surface that you might suspect is there, but you don't really understand it. And of course you don't, because you're not immersed in that other market. So that's when you have to realize that you're going to need input from other sources. You're going to have to educate yourself, and you're going to have to enroll the help of people who do understand that market, and who do understand the consumer culture, understand the consumer trends, understand the economic situation there, understand the cultural background, the value system, all these things, and even just basic market research, like who are your competitors in that market? Are there competitors? You know, there probably are. Who are they? What are they doing? Like, how are they positioning themselves in that market? And anything you do has to be in relation to that, and has to factor that in. Otherwise, you're going to be spending a lot of money on a strategy that, again, maybe worked really well in your home market, but is not going to work in this new market. And that's an unfortunate waste of your resources. When is it, like, what are your like business reasons for entering this new market? You know, just because you happen to speak the language in this other market yourself, because you took Italian in grade school and high school, university, and you like vacationing there, that's not a really good reason to try to enter the Italian market, right? There has to be a business case to be made. So that's where people like yourself come in, right? And kind of can make sure that this is a wise, decision from a business point of view. From a marketing point of view, you can look at, well, okay, so on the assumption that you already have a website, what does the international traffic to your website look like already, without even having done anything to reach out to people outside your own borders? Are you getting international visitors to your website already? Are there certain patterns there that you can see? Like, look at your analytics and see who's already interested in your product or service and is coming to your website already without you even having reached out to them. Because that can give you some clues as to which markets might be worth investigating to then strategically launch into down the road. So that's the first thing, make sure you've picked wisely in terms of where to expand into.
So you have to do your homework, you have to analyze where am I as a company, and you have to also take a good look as to where you want to go and see if that's really on the basis of objective parameters and not just because you like the food and you think it would be it would be a nice place to visit sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to I'd love to have to travel to, I don't know, the south of Spain once a year at least, because of for business reasons.
For business.
But maybe your product is already, there's already some local competitors that are going to make it very difficult for you to get a foothold in that market. Or maybe there's some other reason that it just wouldn't work so well, or maybe it's just a question of prioritization, right? You can't launch into multiple markets all at once. No. I think this too, right? The wise thing to do is to start with one new market, make sure it's going well, make sure you've got a solid foothold, and then move on to the next
rather
one.
than wide. Yes, definitely.
So it's all about picking the right first new market to enter, and then the next one and the next one. So that is a pretty crucial first decision, because that's then going to determine a lot of other things. Like, okay, so now that I know which market I'm trying to enter, what do I need to know about how to market to the people there? How am I going to, even back up a bit more than that, how am I going to position my company, my brand in that market? It might be slightly different than the way you're positioned in your home market, because your competition might be quite different there. Or the thing you're trying to market there is going to be seen in a different way. It's going to serve a different kind of purpose that maybe you hadn't even thought of. It's going to be used in a different way somehow.
Yeah.
So positioning is going to be important. So revisit that. Don't assume it's going to be the same kind of positioning is going to work elsewhere. And then once you've got your positioning figured out, then you can start planning your marketing strategy. But that, of course, requires you to understand what the market's like there. So you're going to need to work with people who understand the local market. You know, whether it's an agency that is in country on the ground,
Yeah. A local, let's say a local foreign agency in the market
yeah,
you're aiming to enter into.
yeah, who have kind of their finger on the pulse of what's going on in that market, what people respond to, which channels they are on, right? It's just because you're having really good success with, being on certain, let's say, social media channels in your home market doesn't mean those same exact channels are going to work well in this new market, even if you
Or if they
translate
even don't
content.
exist in some cases.
Or maybe they don't, yeah, the extreme
China.
case, of course, is China, right? Where it's a completely different, and there, it's a no-brainer. You're going to have to work with local partners to get anywhere at all, because it's just such a different landscape in terms of everything, right? The consumer trends, the channels that you're going to have to be on, absolutely
Also
everything.
the positioning. I mean, I've spoken a lot with clients who maybe have a product that they feel is a very mass product in their home market. And by virtue of the fact that it's European or it's US American, then that is seen as like a premium branded product when you take it into certain Asian markets, especially in China. Like you said, it can be seen as perceived as something completely different to what it would be in its home market.
Yeah, or a product that, in North America, the selling point is this is a green product, it's eco-friendly, it's sustainably produced, it's, all this kind of thing, which is a good
Carbon
selling point
neutral
here.
and
And in Europe, I mean, that's a huge way to market, products like that. In certain Asian countries, that's just not going to be as important as certain other aspects of the product that you might be able to identify.
Or it's
safe for your family, right? There's no toxins in here, and it's not so much a matter of it's not polluting the environment. It's that it's not going to pollute your family, right? It's all about the family. It's all about us, and that's what you got to kind of highlight. It's still the same product. It's just you're positioning it in a different way for that market, and your marketing strategy will be created accordingly. And so that leads me to the next thing is you have most likely some marketing content already that you've been using for your home market, whether it's written content or visual content, anything from images to videos, and maybe you even have audio content, right? If you're doing podcasts or something like that. So some of those things are easier to translate or adapt for a new market, and some of them are a little trickier. You probably don't have to adapt everything, and this is where an international marketing expert,
specialist,
can help you kind of do an audit to see what content of yours that you already have created and invested in, what part of that body of content that you already have can be repurposed in new markets, translated. Probably yes, but at least
we already learned from Joanne Chan at IPP World. Translation is okay maybe for technical manuals, but everything else for marketing, it probably needs transcreation to be.
Yes. So for marketing content, transcreation is definitely what you should consider, because, like I was saying, every market is different, and so the kind of content that you created for your home market is just not going to resonate in the same way. And so it actually makes sense, even if transcreation typically, might cost you a little bit more upfront, but but the investment is worth it, because if it's more effective at convincing people that they want to purchase what you have to offer in that new market, then it will have been worth the investment. And you always have to look at it in that way. And the same thing with even just translation, right? Translation, you should never see translation as a cost. It's really an investment. Yes. And as localization in like translation is sort of one piece of the localization puzzle, but you need to look at this localization process as an investment ultimately, because just like with your content that you've created for your domestic market, there's going to be a return on your investment, right? But you have to know what you're doing, and you have to be smart about what kind of content you're going to offer this market, this audience.
Yeah, and I think also it's important for people to understand that it's not just an investment of time and resources. It's not just an investment of money, let's say, but it's also an investment of time. We have one interview in the summit with an internal communications expert who has done a lot of work with change management across international companies and so on. And she also was talking about the importance of allowing enough time for the localization process, because it's not just translating the words. You have to also make sure that you can prepare the messages correctly so that they're transported in the way that they're actually meant, not just verbally, word for word, translated into the target market.
Yeah. One big mistake that a lot of companies have made in the past and still make to some extent is this tagging translation and localization on the back end of the process, right? So that
please send it to me at lunchtime. Yes.
Yeah. So the in-house team, marketing team, or the local marketing agency that you work with for your home market has like a certain amount of time to come up with a new campaign, create all this content. They put a lot of time and thought and effort and money, frankly, into the local campaign. And then adapting all that for the foreign market, the target, the international markets that you're also going into or are already in, is almost like an afterthought. It's like, oh yeah, right, we have to now kind of quickly adapt this campaign for these other markets that we're in or trying to launch into. It doesn't work that way. Like if creating the domestic campaign took a certain amount of time and effort, you can basically assume that it's going to take as much time and as much effort to localize that for these other markets. And now,
that's also relevant. Sorry to interrupt. I think that's also relevant, isn't it? Even if the target market on the surface has the same language, for example. I mean, I know that a lot of companies who are in the US or who are in the UK, they often think in the beginning, okay, we'll export to the US or the UK, the other market, or maybe they export to somewhere like Singapore or to somewhere like the Philippines, where also there's a very high level of English spoken, or where English is a national language. And they think that because basically it's the same language, that everything just can be used, all of the digital assets are just as relevant. But how would you say that from experience that works out?
Well, that's what localization is all about, right? That's why localization it includes potentially translation, but it's not just translation for that very reason. So, I mean, you and I know that English in the UK is not the same as English in Canada or English in the US or English in Australia. I mean, starting with really, obvious things like spelling, right? I mean, yes, there are differences in spelling, even between Canada and the US. But those are pretty easy to fix, but that's just, again, the tip of the iceberg. Then you have a difference in vocabulary, right? So different concepts have different labels in these different varieties of English. And then, you get into, dialects, you get into idioms, you get into different expressions that just don't work from one market to the next. And so you have to adapt that. Humor is a huge one. And then, you know, between dialects of English, it's a huge, you know, barrier. And so you can only imagine how tricky it becomes when you're talking about completely different languages, right? Translating humor is sort of a classically complicated issue in the localization world, right? So you really need to leave that to someone who knows what they're doing, because it's going to have to be transcreated. Anything to do with humor will have to be basically recreated from scratch using the local brand of humor. So you need to be working with someone who's in country and who totally is immersed in that language and that culture, and who understands the humor of that market, right? But yeah, English is sort of the one that we can kind of appreciate the differences of, because we understand how British English is different from Australian English, is different from Canadian English, is different from US English. And within those borders, of course, there are variations as well, but, you know, let's keep it general. Now you haven't even talked about things like, for the sake of creating a website that's kind of global friendly, even if it's in English only, well, these different English speaking countries don't all use the same currency. So if you're going to be selling something online, if you're doing business online, you know, another part of localization is making sure people can pay in their own currency. Because if you don't let them do that, they're not going to buy from you. It's that simple, right? Things like time and date formats, you know, these are things that are kind of not as obvious, but there are differences in how people read times and dates.
And especially in the first half of the year, this can lead to a lot of confusion, whether I write 1/6/21 or I write 6/1/21. Am I talking about January or am I talking about June? This is one that often confuses me.
So these are things that, you know, localization experts deal with, and those are pretty straightforward issues. But then there's things like, you know, is your website optimized so that people can actually find you in those markets? So then you get into international search engine optimization, and that can get pretty technical. I mean, there's sort of less technical aspects to it, like doing, you know, SEO keyword searches for the right term. So again, you're going to get differences. Like, people search for things differently in the UK than they do in the US, right? The same exact item. Like if I'm searching for a sweater in the US, it means a different thing than if I'm searching for a sweater in the UK, right? If I'm searching for a jumper, that's not the same thing in Canada. Like, there's different keywords for different things and different ways that people search. And if you are an international search engine optimization expert, you will know this, and you will know how to make sure you're using the best keywords possible for the markets that are being targeted, and you will include that in the content on the website. And you will optimize the website in a way, and then it gets into website architecture. You will optimize the website in a way that allows people who are searching for things that you have to offer, that they'll actually find you. If you don't optimize your website, it doesn't matter what's on your website, but if it's not optimized for those new markets, it's going to be very, very difficult for people to find you just by doing a search.
And as we talked in the beginning, if people can't find you, you don't have any business. So
exactly. Yeah. So international SEO is a huge part of getting your message out there, and then just the marketing activities, picking the right networks, picking the right content to share on those networks, and picking the right type of content as well. Like in some markets, your white paper that you spent a lot of time and effort creating for your home market is going to be completely ignored because people just don't necessarily they're not interested in reading a white paper, even in a B2B context. You're much better off creating a video for those people.
Yeah.
because that's what they're more likely to consume. So you have to look at what type of content do people in this target market consume? What do they actually watch? What do they actually read? What do they actually, what types of content do they prefer? And then give them that. Don't force your ideas of what the right content is on them. Take your cues from what the patterns are in that market, and you have to, again, you have to work with local marketers to find that out, or there's lots of, you know, market research companies out there that can help you with that. And then create or transcreate or recreate or localize your content accordingly so that you are actually catering to that new target market.
I think it all comes down to that old saying that the worm doesn't have to taste good to the angler, it has to taste good to the fish that he's trying to catch, right?
I love that, yeah.
this is, it's all that concept of really creating value for your target audience rather than creating something that you think that they ought to be interested in listening to. And Kathrin, I know it's not your specialization, you're more on the content side, but does this idea of localization and internationalization, does that even go into the technical side of things? So if I have a website, does the coding of the website also need to be made international in some way?
Yeah, so I mean, like you
Just
say,
as
I'm
an
not
aside question, you know.
I'm not a technical, like the technicalities are over my head, but I've done enough interviews now on my podcast to know that there are issues that you have to think about when you're actively trying to make your website accessible and engaging for an international audience, for international visitors. So if you're serious about attracting international visitors to your website and keeping them there, not making them go, oh, this is not very user-friendly, I'm gonna leave again. If you want to actually keep them on your website and get them to engage with your content and maybe purchase from you or whatever the goal of your website is, you need to think about international UX. You need to think about international website architecture. There are different ways to set up a website to be global, to be globalized. Some websites,
I don't
this is
want
beyond
to
my domain.
I just wanted to ask if this is something that somebody should have on their, basically they should have on their, in the back of their mind, that maybe they should get somebody to take a look at this. Perhaps if they're starting out with a new website, that they should start out that way from the very beginning, that it can be internationalized maybe at a later point in time, that the coding should be built in that way and the architecture should be built that it's easier to internationalize.
Yeah, for tech companies in particular, when it comes to code, you need to, and if you know that you're going to probably want to do business internationally, and why wouldn't you, right? I mean, especially with a digital product or service, there's really nothing stopping you from building a global customer base, right?
Yeah.
There's no physical product that you're exporting, so why not make it global ready from the beginning? And the way you do that is you make sure that your code is what they call internationalized. So internationalization involves writing the code, you know, in a certain way. And again, there are lots of resources on this online. And yet you'd be surprised how often tech companies fail to do this because, especially I think in North America, there's just not enough of awareness around this issue. That code needs to be what they call internationalized, written in a certain way with certain best practices in mind, so that you can, down the road when you're ready, you can localize that code for different languages and different regions. If you don't internationalize your code, it becomes extremely difficult and extremely expensive to retroactively do it. Like, so you're better off doing it from the beginning. And it's internationalizing your code that then allows you to create versions in other languages for other markets later on. You don't have to do it right away, but at least lay the groundwork with proper internationalization. And to make sure that you're doing that piece right, it is totally worth your money to engage an internationalization consultant, an expert who understands what's involved and what the best practices are. It's not rocket science, but there are certain best practices. It's a niche, and I think it's growing. I hope it's growing. I think the awareness of it is growing. But it's kind of like, I had someone on my show, on my podcast, who had a nice metaphor for this. It's kind of like if you're a tech company and you don't know about internationalization and you don't take that into consideration at all, what you might end up doing is building this beautiful house. It's got all these fancy features. It's just wonderful to look at from the outside. You go inside, it looks great. Everything looks great. And then you think to yourself, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have plumbing? Okay, so now we need plumbing, and the plumbing being the internationalization.
Okay.
Well, okay, you're gonna have to rip open all the walls, probably go into the foundation of the house. Like you don't want to get there. You don't want to get to that point where you realize you forgot to install plumbing, right? After you've already done everything else. You've painted the walls, you've hung picture frames. That's not the time to figure out that you actually need some plumbing in there too. So internationalization is important. If you're a tech company, look into it, hire someone to help you with that and get it right the first time.
But I mean, as far as I understand, that's like this whole process that we've been talking about today of localization, that if you thinking that you want to go into international markets, it really pays to think about your strategy from the very beginning, to do your homework, to think about which steps. And I think almost everybody has learned, who's had some very basic marketing training, has learned that you have to think about where you're going to sell, what you're going to sell, who you're going to sell to, all of these basic steps of marketing, and that it's important to think about those in relation to the target market that you want to go to, and not just to treat international business as something that, oh, well, somebody sent me an inquiry from, I don't know, from Democratic Republic of Congo, and so now I'm exporting to my product or my service to the Congo simply because somebody asked about it. That it should be a more systematic approach than that, to do it in a good way, sustainably.
You need to be prepared to invest roughly the amount of time and research and probably resources as you did when you launched in your home market.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal, right? It's not something you should do lightly. It's not something you can do sort of on the side when you have time. It's something that you have to do, in a very strategic way, based on good information and a solid business plan. And so, yeah, you have to be cognizant of what's involved, and you also have to realize that you can't possibly know everything, right? So that you're going to have to work with people on the ground in that market to make it happen, to facilitate the process, to give you advice, to give you market intelligence about how to proceed in that market, and to work with from a marketing point of view, which is where I come from. Work with people who understand that market intimately, who understand what it's going to take to get your message across in that market in an engaging way. And then also, keep in mind that launching is one thing, but then once you're in that market, you presumably you want to be there, not just, you don't want to be a flash in the pan, you want to make it sustainable. So then how are you going to stay there, build your brand there, and offer your customers in that market the same level of good service before, during, and after they make a purchase as you do with your customers in your local market. So customer service, have a plan for how you're going to actually serve these customers, right? If they have inquiries. Yeah. These days there's all kinds of options that didn't exist even like 5-10 years ago. So multilingual chatbots are becoming more and more sophisticated, right? So there are ways to cover some issues, and you don't, it's not like you have to have like a whole call center dedicated to this new market. Like there are solutions out there, and more of these solutions involve a certain level of automation. Yep. So it's actually very interesting to watch, the evolution of all the technology on that side of things, and multilingual, anything from AI assisted translation to AI assisted multilingual customer service. There's a lot of possibilities now that didn't exist, even a few years ago. So, and it's becoming more and more affordable for, even mid-sized companies. So it's worth investigating, but you do need a plan. You can't just kind of launch and then see what happens, right? You have to have a plan, and you're going to need someone in-house who is on top of this, right? Who understands, basically be the link between your company and the brand that you've built and the brand that you want to keep building and see flourish and see maintained. So a link between that brand and the vendors that you're working with, because as you're trying to build this global brand, it's always sort of a balance between
global and how much local do you need?
Yeah, maintaining your global brand identity that you have worked so hard to build in the first place, and making sure it is not eroded as you expand internationally. You want your brand to keep its integrity, so you need to know what your core brand values are, what you stand for as a brand. But those values, that core, should be global ready. So it needs to be universal enough in some ways that you can take that and transplant it and see it flourish in other markets. And you have to be able to trust your local vendors, marketing people, translation people, localization people. You have to trust them to be able to take that brand and make it work in that market with the right messaging that's going to work in that market.
Yeah.
So that does require someone in-house who is kind of, who owns that globalization process, right? Who has a seat at the table with the executive at headquarters, but who also is connected to the vendors and understands what they need from you, and makes sure that they have what they need to do their job well, and that everybody understands, yes, that the brand is protected and maintained and continues to flourish beyond borders.
Yeah, I think that this is often quite it's difficult, because there's always a certain amount of tension between how much global does it need and how much localization, in the sense of how much local input and how much local flavor can the brand carry.
Yeah, I think it also, it's very dependent on what type of business you're in. If you're in more B2C businesses where you're dealing directly with the consumer, and the consumer is and the product or service you're offering is something that they would use more sort of in their personal life, less in their work life, let's say, there's a lot more need and opportunities for getting creative with localizing the messaging and perhaps even localizing the product itself to suit that market, right? When you're talking about B2B, where you're dealing with a business client and maybe it's a software as a service product or something like that, there's not as much need maybe to adapt messaging in ways that are quite as creative, because it's a work environment, it's a business environment. And again, there's a range, right, within B&B as well, B2B, sorry, as well, so that you have to sort of figure out what the right balance is there. But as much as there's something called there's a market research company called Nimdzi Insights, which does a lot of research on the localization industry. And one of the reports that they put out is the Project Underwear report. And the underwear effect, it's named after the underwear effect. And the underwear effect was sort of coined by one of the co-founders of Nimdzi Insights, Renato Beninato. And the idea behind the underwear effect is that the more likely your customer is to consume the product or service that you're offering in their underwear at home, you know, when they're at their most relaxed, at their most informal, you know, in their most private moments.
I think that
the
changed
more likely,
this year.
So the more likely you are to be in your underwear, you know, at home on the sofa as you consume this product or service, the more likely you're going to need to localize it very heavily, right?
Yeah.
And the reverse is also true. The more buttoned up and formal and sort of in a public setting, you know, work setting, whatever you are when you use or consume this product or service, the less deep the localization will probably have to be, because there is such a thing as a sort of an international business culture. There are obviously variations across the world. You know, business etiquette, as we know, is very different from one country to the next, especially from one part of the world to the next. So that definitely has to be part of your marketing strategy as well. But this underwear effect is an interesting one to keep in mind.
Definitely. So I think we're almost out of time. I just wanted to ask you a couple of extra questions. Are there some mistakes that you see entrepreneurs regularly making when they first go overseas, that you would say, okay, these mistakes, for somebody who's new, they should really keep their eye open and make sure that they don't fall into those traps, for example?
Yeah, I think the main mistake that I see is just this kind of assuming, you know, it's never good to assume.
It's dangerous.
You know what they say. Yes.
It's risky. Yeah.
Assuming is always a big risk, and because you just don't know what you don't know. So I think the main mistake is to have this kind of copy and paste approach to marketing, to assume that what worked in your home market is going to work elsewhere just as well, and that all you have to do is just translate at the most. Yeah. And even then, right, if you're entering another market that on the surface speaks the same language, you don't even have to bother with translation, right? This assumption, right, that there's no cultural difference, and that or if there is, it's not going to make a difference to how well your marketing is going to work there, is a big problem that I see. I mean, English is one obvious example, but another one is Spanish. I mean, when you think of all the countries around the world where Spanish is the preferred language, and if you're a Spanish speaker, you know that Spanish spoken in Spain is very different from the Spanish spoken in, you know, Mexico or in Argentina, yeah, or in, you know, Chile. And so
the vocabulary is completely different.
Completely different. So you have to localize even between Spanish-speaking markets. Yeah. Same goes with Portuguese, as we know. Like, Brazilian Portuguese is very, very different from the Portuguese spoken in Portugal. I grew up in Quebec. I know that Quebecois French is very different from the French spoken in France. And if you try to run an ad campaign or marketing campaign in Quebec that was obviously created in France for continental French people, it's going to backfire because,
Yep.
in fact, Quebecers will, potentially be insulted because they expect things to be localized for their market.
Yep.
Because they are not.
They're not French.
They're not French. They're Quebecois. So assuming, that's the main problem I see, assuming that, oh, well, we can take a shortcut here. This will work, or we'll just try it like this. Instead of doing some research and reaching out to people who know a bit more about that market than you do. It's always a good idea to not just do the homework yourself, but also work with people who are experts in that new market.
Okay, so maybe a last question, and this is a question I've wanted to ask since you agreed to do this interview with me. If you were sitting with a good friend of yours who's a CEO of a company in Canada, and they ask you over a coffee about a top tip for going abroad, it's a little bit maybe of a variation of some of the questions we've already discussed, but what would be your top tip for them, besides not assuming?
Well, I would say get comfortable with the idea that you're going to be on a very steep learning curve, that everything that you know and that you believe about what's true of your home market will also apply to the new market. It's again, this idea of don't assume.
Yeah.
Realize that you don't know what you don't know, and be prepared to learn. Just take this mindset of learning and embrace it. Because I actually enjoy, the reason I enjoy doing the work I do is because I'm learning something new every day. I think if you're not enthusiastic about learning new things all the time and being prepared to have your mind expanded and being prepared to see things from different perspectives, then don't do it. Don't even try to expand internationally, because that's really what it's all about. It's the ability to broaden your mind, broaden your perspective, keep learning, and keep being surprised, right? And collaborating with people that know more about a topic than you do in that market. So just being adaptable and being willing to learn is sort of a prerequisite, I think. And making sure that your team at your company is also embracing this mindset.
Yeah, I would agree that this is really important, that the whole team has to be behind the idea of going internationally, because otherwise it's not going to be a successful endeavor anyway. Yeah. Kathrin, thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been really lovely. I'm sure we could continue for another couple of hours and switch between languages a couple of times probably as well. I know that Bubble, which is the London-based digital marketing and SEO agency where you're the, I think, new head of content localization, they have a new global brand building service. So maybe you can tell us, where can people go to find out more about this, or to contact you if they feel that your services would be a good fit for them, and to talk to an expert when they realize that they shouldn't assume that they know how to do their overseas markets?
Oh, thanks, Kathrin. Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to contact me directly, I'm on LinkedIn. It's sort of my primary platform where I spend a lot of time, and I try to share a lot of content. So you can look me up on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with anyone who wants to connect with me. Yeah, I just took on a new role at Bubble. Bubble is, as you said, it's a creative content and SEO agency, and they're headquartered in London, but they also have they have a team member or team members, I should say, on this side of the Atlantic in the US, and now I'm on the team too. So it's a really really energetic, young, and quickly growing agency. I'm very excited to be working with them. The way I look at it is, so as you said, I'm the head of content localization, and my role is more at the strategic level. On the agency side, I help with localization and strategy, because as we mentioned, just translating everything willy-nilly is not the best way to go about it. You know, you might need to translate some things, you might not need to translate other things, you might need to create some things from scratch, you might want to create different types of content for certain markets. So there needs to be a strategy behind the localization piece. So that's where I come in. But yeah, Bubble also has a service that is sometimes a bit difficult to find with other agencies, and that's international search engine optimization. And keyword link building. So for international websites, and so there's a whole range of services around global brand building that we can help with, and Bubble has a lot of experience with that. So reach out to me at Bubble. The website is www.bubbledigital, all one word, and Bubble is spelled B-U-B-B-L. So B-U-B-B-L digital.com. And yeah, you'll see all the different services there, and global brand building is one of the offerings. And yeah, I'd love to have a chat with anyone who is curious about that, and we can figure out whether there's any way we can help you to build that global brand that you're trying to build.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a very exciting new position. So all the best for that. And I shall look forward to learning more about that at some time.
Thanks so much, Kathrin.
Yeah, thank you for your time today. It's been great.
It was a pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.